All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we are stepping straight into a seriously dark, mythological epic to explore a really profound concept, metaphysical rupture. Think about a kingdom, Londaria, that was so absolutely obsessed with rigid order, it ended up shattering reality itself. We're going to unpack the tragedy of this stasis and look at how a harbinger of chaos, known as the Uncanny Jester, dismantled an entire absolute monarchy from the inside out.
By the blade that laughs through the ancient wall, the scholar's logic shall finally fall. Now, that isn't just some pretty poetry, it is a terrifying promise. It perfectly sets the stage for a catastrophic collapse where absolute law, the very bedrock of this society, just vanishes. You see, the jester isn't here to debate policy. He's here to literally laugh the kingdom's foundations into dust.
Act 1. The Rigid Kingdom and the Fool.
So, to really understand this world, we have to look at the Londrian king's desperate obsession following a brutal 100 years of war. He tried to build this impenetrable architecture of stasis to cage his own people, using what are called Apollonian gaskets. Think of these as metaphysical constraints. They're rigid structures of absolute law meant to completely freeze society in place, acting as arbiters of stasis to silence the messy, unpredictable reality of the human heart.
But humanity really can't be frozen forever. The jester completely challenged this royal order by invoking the rune of the Holy Fool. By throwing the beggar and the nobleman side by side down into the rowdy theater pit, he basically forced the kingdom to look in the mirror and acknowledge its own absurdity. Rigid law simply couldn't hold up against that kind of shared, roaring laughter that completely obliterated the social hierarchy.
Act 2. The Trapdoor. The monarch made one fatal error here. He actually believed he could use the playhouses to safely contain his own shadow, basically giving the people a tiny, heavily controlled dose of chaos. But the stage is not a cage for the shadow, it is the trapdoor. These circular playhouses, they weren't quarantine zones at all, they were conduits intentionally built to let the darkness seep right out into reality.
And this leads us to a ritualistic tearing of the veil, which happens in 3 distinct phases. First, you invoke the runes of creation. Second, you tear down that 4th wall, totally stripping away all the theatrical artifice. And finally, stage and reality merge entirely. The shadow stops being this safe performance you watch from the gallery and suddenly becomes a breathing, active participant in Londaria's governance.
Act 3. Vessels of Chaotic Rupture.
The metaphysical rupture truly kicks off when the jester summons 3 chaotic spirits. The story begins in a kingdom of eternal twilight, where these siblings, the wit, the hunger, and the small, were sealed within a tall, jagged spire. They didn't belong to the world of men or monsters. They serve as the ultimate forces of subversion, and their primary weapon is the jagged blade of laughter. Unlike the king's Apollonian gaskets of rigid law and silence, this blade is fluid chaos. It slices right through the silence of ancient stone, shattering the gilded cages of logic. It achieves the sound of shattering expectations, peeling away the architecture of stasis for a slow, colorful death.
Act 4. The Fall of the Monarch.
So the 3 human pillars of the realm are systematically targeted and possessed by these chaotic spirits, and they replace the originals by dressing up in these twisted, jester-like parodies of their former attire. The scholar's refined verse is subverted into mocking laughter by the wit. The knight, the cold enforcer, is turned to rot by the hunger. And the king's iron-clad majesty is twisted into sheer panic by the small. They literally transform these grim fortresses into surreal playhouses.
Just consider the fate of the knight under the hunger. He once wielded absolute law, but under this subversion, that absolute law proves to be nothing more than a contract written in disappearing ink. The knight's impenetrable armor, which was the ultimate symbol of stasis, begins to decay from the inside out, reeking of 1,000 fly wings. His rigid duty just rots away.
But the ultimate subversion? That's saved for the monarch himself. The small, acting as the sovereign of absurdity, completely replaces the king. That ironclad majesty is shattered into a humiliating spectacle of rhythmic stumbles and frantic panic. The king realizes his authority was entirely an illusion, leaving him exposed as a naked, shivering fool out in the violet frost.
Act 5. The Clock and the Silence.
Now, the theater, having served as that trapdoor, transforms into an instrument of absolute doom through a progression of runes. It started with the Holy Fool, purging those dark impulses. Then, the truth-telling monster blurred the lines of good and evil to reveal the shadow truth. Finally, the rune of distorted reflection exposes a horrifying reality. The king's shadow was never actually tamed. It simply found a monarch weak enough to wear.
And so the Playhouse is reborn as the Great Clock of Hollowed Souls. The performance is over, folks. Now, every single heartbeat counts toward an inevitable societal debt. This clock isn't ticking down to the end of a play, it is chiming for the tragic fall of a monarchy. It's ticking relentlessly as the old world of rigid order rots all the way down to the bone.
The inevitable Great Silence.
At the very end, the artifice of the stage is utterly destroyed, and the Obsidian Doctor arrives to begin the Great Silence. But it finds the kingdom is already undone by its own image. The Jester had stripped the stage bare. The Jester's final bell rings in perfect harmony with the Doctor striking his bone staff against the earth. It's a dual decree. Lundaria is undone. This Great Silence perfectly mirrors a total societal shift. The old world is now nothing more than a hollow shell, witnessed only by a young upstart playwright named Shakespeare, left alone in the ashes.
And so, I leave you with this lingering thought. Was the Jester's madness actually the cure for a society choking on its own rigid stasis? Or was the Doctor's inevitable silence just the final punchline to a massive cosmic joke? The Great Clock of Souls has chimed, and Lundaria has fallen. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope you walk away fascinated and, maybe just a little bit haunted.